across Tokyo.
Now to tonight's special report about a problem that backyard gardeners across Australia may not even know they have. In recent months, gardeners in parts of Victoria began noticing that their summer vegetable crops were dying, and as a few of them began swapping stories, they realised something much bigger was at play. Scientists have pinned the blame on a commercial compost mix they say was almost certainly contaminated with a powerful herbicide. It's a known problem overseas, where public campaigns have led to restrictions on the herbicide to stop it from getting into backyard gardens. Although it's been happening for years in Australia, it was rarely discussed outside the industry until now. This story from Richard Willingham and producer Ben Knight.
These tubs were going to be one of Kelly West's summer garden projects.
So we were pretty excited about these beds and got soil delivery specifically for these beds because we wanted to grow stuff for the neighbours to be able to pick produce.
But within weeks, they began dying off.
Zucchini, squash, tomato, eggplant and radishes around the edges. Nothing survived.
It was happening in the rest of the garden too.
This is a pumpkin that I planted a couple of months ago with soil that was topped up from our supplier. It hasn't really done anything. I've got pumpkins growing out the back, growing over the greenhouse, flourishing.
The difference is the soil. The backyard pumpkins were grown in home soil. The ones in the front in a soil mix bought from a nearby garden centre. 100 kilometres away in central Victoria, the same thing was happening.
After a couple of weeks, I started to notice that the leaves were curling really, really tightly in on themselves. And then the whole plant just became very twisted. I had never, ever seen anything like that before. They certainly didn't flower or produce any beans. And then eventually they just yellowed and died.
Claire also suspected the soil was causing it and set up a series of test pots in her greenhouse.
I did one pot for each of the different batches that I had bought, and I also had a fifth pot here which was just home garden soil. The home soil thrived. All of these ones, the leaves slowly curled, they yellowed and then they died.
Claire removed the contaminated soil from her garden, but was then faced with the problem of what to do with it. So she came here to the back of her property and dumped it in these 2 rows. That was in October. Since then, as you can see, nothing has grown.
I told as many people as I could that I knew had also bought the same product, and then realised it was a very widespread problem.
By November, a small Facebook group of concerned gardeners had quickly grown to more than 200 members, dotted around central Victoria and Melbourne. But since the ABC broke this story this morning, gardeners across the state have reported exactly the same thing happening. Some had spent thousands of dollars on gardens that now appeared to be poisoned. All wanted to know what had gone wrong. Dr. Chris Williams is an urban horticulture expert at Melbourne University, and he's pretty sure he knows.
Almost certainly the result of a aminopyralid or clopyralid, herbicide.
They're part of the phenoxy acid family of herbicides, powerful broadleaf weed killers that home gardeners aren't allowed to use. But Chris Williams says they're making their way from agricultural use into home gardens through commercial compost.
Oh, I think it's a terrible situation. It's absolute Russian roulette at the moment. Livestock are eating pasture that's been treated with these chemicals. It goes straight through them into the manure, doesn't break down, and then people are unwittingly or putting them onto their home gardens, and they're getting deformed crops as a result.
After being hit with complaints, the EPA began investigating the dying gardens of central Victoria and requested the local business cease sales. But its findings were inconclusive, saying while tests could not substantiate the presence of contaminants, the EPA believes there was an issue with product control either from the original supplier or during mixing at the shop. However, the ABC understands that testing has found traces of phenoxy acid herbicide in some samples. The independent lab that tested the Suez samples told the ABC, "We haven't been able to identify a smoking gun as yet, but there's been lots of sound of gunfire." Suez says testing shows the organic compounds in its compost mix are within EPA standards. But it's not that simple. These herbicides are so powerful they can cause damage with just a few parts per billion, below the technical ability of many labs to pick up. It raises questions about what protections there are for gardeners. Suez did not answer questions from the ABC about where the contamination came from or how it plans to stop it from happening again. And this is not a one-off event caused by a bad batch in October. Kelly West bought soil a year ago from the same source, and it did the same thing. Consumer Affairs says it's investigating, but for now, no one has answers to some very big questions, and not just about refunds and compensation.
We really don't know what to do with the soil at the moment. I suppose we should probably cover it in plastic because I know that when it rains, maybe it's leaking into the rest of our soil, but we really don't know. For people who are really new to gardening, they may not realise that it's not their fault that their plants aren't growing, and that might then kind of make them give up on gardening. So I think it's really important for people to know that there's more to this. It's not just you don't have a green thumb.
Richard Willingham, ABC